Just look at those fabulous poppies. They're called ladybird, and like the poached eggplants, they're hardy annuals. And for me, one of nature's little bonuses, because I didn't sow them, they just arrived there of their own accord. Now, I got the idea for the hardy annual border here from a nurseryman who was too busy to look after his own garden, so he sowed it with hardy annuals, and every year they just did it for him. What an inspiration. And my goodness, we've got an inspirational programme for you today. Dan Pearson reveals the thinking behind his very individual style of garden design. The Lake District was, of course, the inspiration for my rockless rock garden, and Bob Flowerdew is inspired to grow watermelons in grass clippings. But first, last week I visited Bodnant in North Wales, where I found out about the inspiration behind the National Trust. Exactly 100 years ago, three public-spirited people, Octavia Hill, Sir Robert Hunter and Canon Hardwicke Rawnsley, saw the need to conserve the best of our historic houses and landscapes for the public good. They were concerned about the threat to our countryside from increased industrialisation. So they set up a non-profit-making organisation funded by public subscription. In 1896, they bought their first building for £10, and the National Trust was on its way. In 1948, together with the Royal Horticultural Society, they set up the Garden Fund with the idea of conserving the great gardens of the country. And to date, they own 162 of them. And this is one of them, Bodnant in North Wales, and there's no doubt that it's one of the best in the country. It extends to an amazing 80 acres, and many of us whose gardens are probably no bigger than about 80 square yards find it quite difficult to relate a garden like this to our own plot back home. Over the next few weeks, I'll be visiting 4 National Trust gardens with the express intention of finding ideas that we can take back and use in our own gardens. All these places abound with inspiration, and it's often just a case of scaling them down. This idea struck me as soon as I came in. Just look at the way this fabulous rose tumbles over the wall. Now, if you had a garden, perhaps a sloping garden with a retaining wall, well, you could do this too. This is a vigorous rambler called gardenia, and it's planted on this side of the wall to trail over the other side. Every year, some of these really older shoots are pruned right out, but the younger ones are left in, and they'll grow to about 12 feet in a year. And then in the winter, they're trained into the wires where they're needed. And the flowers are borne on these short side shoots to all face upwards. And doesn't it look marvellous? This pergola is very elegant, and yet it would be quite simple to make it at home. It's just 4 bits of 50mm by 50mm, that's 2x2 timber, a little bit of trellis infill, the bottom is a skirting board, and the top is a picture rail. And of course, all these mouldings are available ready-made at the timber merchants. And I love what they've done with the steps. They've softened the hard lines beautifully with these campanulas. This is a variety called birch hybrid. And if you're building steps, or even the patio for that matter, why not leave a little space between the paving slabs, fill it with gritty compost, and sow a campanula like this in it? Well, the whole garden is looking superb at the moment, but there's one particular feature which is nothing short of breathtaking. And one of the great features of Bodnant in late May and early June is this fantastic laburnum arch. How old is it?
Well, the original trees were planted in 1880.
Were they?
Yes, and of course this is the original laburnum arch. It has been copied many times, especially since the war.
Now, some of the trees are very old, as you say, but you must have to replace them from time to time.
Some of the oldest ones in the arch are about 75 years old, but there are many young ones as well, and we've planted quite a few in the last 5 years or so.
We know that laburnum is poisonous, and particularly the seeds. You have lots of people visiting here, children in particular. Doesn't that worry you?
Yes, it is a problem. So what we do is when the laburnum arch has come to the end of its flowering period, we actually close the arch off, and we have staff who actually cut all these flowers off with scissors or sharp secateurs. So every dead flower, and therefore the pod, is removed. The plant definitely flowers better the next year if we remove the seed pods, and although it is a gigantic job, of course, the visitors expect to see this laburnum arch flowering beautifully every year.
The lovely thing about a laburnum arch is that you can achieve results in really just a year or two. Now, you can buy much smaller metal tunnels than Martin's, which will fit most size gardens, and they look very good. I've got a couple in my garden which have apple trees growing on them, and they look smashing. But here in my vegetable garden, I'm going for something even smaller. You can buy these metal arches in the shape of an arbour with a back to them, and that's what I'm going to do here. Or alternatively, of course, if you're handy, you could make the same sort of thing out of wood. That's no problem, but what might be a little bit more difficult is buying the laburnum, because you need a young tree, or a whip as they call them, so you'll probably have to go to a proper tree nursery and buy it bare-rooted in the winter. Now, that's what I did, and I potted mine up, and now they're ready for planting. Now, I prepared the soil here very well, because, of course, what we're after is rapid growth. So there's plenty of manure and a bit of fertiliser in here too. But, of course, you could use spent mushroom compost if you haven't got manure, because laburnums don't mind a limey soil at all. And then, of course, you tie the tree nice and firmly into the arch, a bit of soft string. It won't probably do a lot this year, but next year all those shoots will start growing out really quite vigorously, and you can train those up vertically, side by side, just in the way that Martin did his, and it'll completely cover the side of the arch and look wonderful. You do exactly the same thing, of course, on the other side, and at the back I'm planting a rose. Now, I've used a climber here because I think a rambler would be just too vigorous. And either side of that I've planted a couple of clematis. Now, the trick is to use late flowering clematis, because at the end of the season you can just cut them right down to the ground, pull all the rubbish out of the rose and the laburnum to give them a good chance in the spring, and the clematis will do the same job for you the following year. And now for the icing on the cake.
Most of us have some grass and produce grass clippings. Some of us even regard them as a material we have to get rid of. You see them in plastic bags beside the road waiting for the dustbin men. But grass clippings aren't something you want to dump. They're one of the most useful resources in the garden. They really are a fantastic source of fertility. Now, the obvious use is you put them in the compost heap, but that's really a bit of a waste. More than that, we can use them first, and we can use them as a mulch. Instead of buying expensive mulches, you can use grass clippings around trees, around roses and shrubs. They act just the same as any other mulch, but you must put them on in thin layers. Otherwise, they can form that awful claggy mess. But if you put them on in thin layers, they suppress the weeds and they keep in the moisture. What more could you want? Grass clippings are especially useful under raspberries, which can have a real problem if the weeds get in. And they're also very handy under blackcurrants, which are hungry feeders and enjoy them as a mulch. Grass clippings can even be used as a pre-emergent mulch. That means that you put them down over big seeds when you're sowing them before they come up. And then you'll find that for peas and beans, they'll come through a thin layer of grass clippings, while the weeds will not. Widely spaced crops, such as these brassicas, can also benefit from a layer of grass clippings. They'll keep in the moisture and keep down the weeds. And they're adding to the fertility. You see, just a handful of grass clippings is all you need to improve soil fertility. If you just sprinkle a handful loosely in the soil, it'll be greens for the worms. They'll eat the greens, digest it with the soil, make worm casts, which improve the soil's richness. And the worms will improve the aeration and the drainage at the same time. And what's more, if there's a frost about, then just a light sprinkling of grass clippings over the leaves of a tender plant will protect it from the frost. And then in the morning, the plant will just throw off those clippings, or you can dust them off. As I'm sure you've noticed, a bag of grass clippings heats up. Now, they used to grow melons and cucumbers on hotbeds of fermenting horse manure. Well, I've eliminated the horse. By mixing up grass clippings with some shredded newspaper or straw, you can make them heat up for a longer period, but not quite as hot. And that is exactly what we need to start off melons and cucumbers. But you need to contain it, and I've used some old car tyres. They're perfect, they keep the heat in. But if you haven't got any car tyres, well then you can use just several black plastic dustbin bags. And if you put some newspaper in between the layers of bags, they'll help keep the heat in. Now, the grass clippings on their own aren't quite enough for the melons or cucumbers. You must put a bucket full of compost on top just to start them off in. But then the roots will grow down into the rotting pile of grass and newspaper and straw, and it'll be the richest feed they could ever have. You will grow wonderful crops. Now, you don't want to lose all that lovely heat. The clippings are creating it. If it gets lost, it won't work so well. Now, put a cloche or a cold frame inside your greenhouse. Now, I've done the same thing on an enormous scale. I've put this wee polytunnel inside this big one. And melons and cucumbers don't mind light shade. In fact, they need it, so they'll do really well in here. But don't despair if you haven't got a greenhouse or a polytunnel. You can still get a good crop of melons or cucumbers if you've got a well-insulated cold frame, just like this one I made out of a dead deep freezer. There's a bit of shading to stop it getting too bright, and some glass sheets to keep the heat in, though it needs some ventilation. Do keep the lid, because that'll keep it warm at night. And inside, we don't just have a melon or a cucumber, we have a little watermelon plant.
Ever since I visited the Lake District 3 weeks ago and saw what we were doing to our limestone pavements, I've been motivated to make rock artificially and to build myself a rock garden. And I must say, I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. I think they look pretty natural. But now comes the exciting bit, the planting. So I've spent a couple of happy hours down at the specialist alpine nursery, and I've come back with a whole load of little treasures. I like to start off with a few dwarf conifers, but when you buy them, do make sure that they really are dwarf, because some of the so-called dwarfs will grow to something like 3 foot across, and of course that's much too big for a rock garden of this size. Now, you remember that this compost is extremely gritty, because that's exactly the sort of conditions that they need. Now, some of the very common, easy to grow alpine plants are really lovely. Things like this little saxifrage. Now, this will grow into quite a little mound, and it looks attractive even without any flowers, and you could regard those as something of a bonus. Achillea is something else that I love, because not only has that got good flowers, but it's got this lovely grey foliage too, which contrasts extremely well with the foliage of the other plants. Make sure that you put the labels in, by the way, because it does increase your interest quite a bit if you know what the plants are. That's beginning to look rather nice already. And finally, I think in this bit, I'm going to put in a little alpine pink. Wonderful little plants, these, with the typical pink flowers. when you've planted up each one of these little pockets, they need to be mulched over the top with a bit of grit. And what you do is just spread it round and tuck it in underneath the leaves like this, and that will keep the leaves off the ground and stop them rotting, and also acts as a little bit of a storage heater, reflecting the heat up to the plants, and they'll love it. The idea really is that you're just making them feel at home. Now there's one plant that is a little bit different from the others, and that's the Lewisias. Now if you look at this one, you can see here that it's got a soft centre and the leaves direct the rain into the middle of the plant, and that can actually rot it. So what you do with this one is to plant it in a little crevice and put it slightly on its side like that, and that will allow the rainwater to drain off it. Now that one is a demure little character, but the ones that you'll mostly see in garden centres are hybrids of Lewisia cotyledon, and they're really flamboyant. And you carry on planting each of the pockets with these smashing little plants in exactly the same way. Of course, it'll take a couple of years for these plants to fill out and look their best, but that's the nice thing about plants, they just keep getting better and better. Well, last week, Vanessa Collingridge visited a garden in Northamptonshire that was started 7 years ago and is still improving.
As a garden designer, Dan Pearson manages to see quite a bit of the world, and with that opportunity to travel comes some unusual and varied influences on his work. Hello there. Hi there, Dan. Dan, this is a wonderful garden.
Thank you.
What was the inspiration for it?
I was lucky enough to be given a scholarship to the Valley of Flowers in Himalayas about 8 years ago when I was at Kew. And when I got to the valley, there was this amazing, huge valley that was miles long, that was covered with herbaceous plants that were just growing in amongst each other. And it looked like the whole thing had been painted with polygonums and potentillas, and I was just completely inspired by it. If you look, what happens is that you get big, bold clumps of certain things, and then satellites of sort of seeding plants that break out from that. And basically what I decided to do was try and apply that to this garden here, so that you got this amazing movement of things through gardens that look very naturalistic. What we arrived with basically was this area here at the back of the house was a thicket of brambles and thistles and grass up to here. But one of the most amazing features about it was this piece of wood at the side, which is actually not part of the property. So we wanted to drag this wood into the garden and make it feel as if this wood here was actually definitely part of this. So we've used things which feel as if they're sort of on the skirt of the wood, so that you're not aware of the boundary between the ornamental garden and the wild.
So were you using native British plants to achieve that continuum?
Well, we've sort of done a mix, really. I mean, basically it's a feel. You've got to get the feel of the whole thing.
So you've actually got one variety of plant really growing into something quite similar?
Yes, I mean, the idea is basically that you've got, say you've got this elder at the back here. That's actually brought down into this sweetbriar rose here, which is actually, you know, one of our natives. And then we're using the pink cow parsley here, this Caerophyllum. So it's sort of cheating, it's playing with the idea of this being part of the woodland, and it almost like being woodland edge.
When you were designing this garden, how important to you was colour?
I think the next most important thing after the fact that it was a wild garden was that there was some fantastic colour in here. And we've basically started out by using these two big nut trees, which have got this fantastic colour, very dark, rich colour, and they're an amazing foil for other things like these bright pinks. And even in wild plants, you can get some really good colour. There's the ragged robin and this bistort. They're really good colours. They can be taken out into the rest of the garden.
Now this area changes colour and changes feel altogether. What are you trying to do here?
I think what is important in an area that's very densely planted is that there's some relief, and I felt this was almost like a woodland glade where animals had sort of made a little a clearing. But some really nice things seeding into here now. This ragged robin has come in for the first time this year, and the yellow rattle, which is a semi-parasite, lives on grass roots, is actually keeping the grass down and has seeded through here really successfully.
When you go on your travels, are you trying to recreate the specific varieties of plants that you find in those countries?
No, I think it's more a sort of feel, and I think if you can get that feel of things being wild in your garden, that's basically what I'm after. I mean, this was a combination I saw in the Pyrenees. It's the Viola cornuta and the wild strawberry. Although it can be anything as much close to home, things like this bloody cranespill. And the Scotch briar, it's a native.
So it doesn't have to be exotic?
No, it can be, you can be quite close to home to get inspiration.
If you grow native plants or even cultivated varieties of natives, as Dan suggested, then they'll very often seed themselves all over the place and create those drifts for you. This one is the Welsh poppy, Meconopsis cambrica, and it'll grow almost anywhere, even under this dense shade. It's a prolific seeder, and it can actually even become a problem, but my goodness, it's a good problem to have, because of course it's very easy to pull it up where it's not wanted. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.